Welcome to the Beau Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing. Don't forget that you can watch all full episodes at ntd.com/The Beau Show or at epochtv.com/The Beau Show. While many of you have been decorating your homes for Christmas and Hanukkah and getting into the spirit of the season, a sneaky little addition to a defense bill has been toyed with that affects you because it affects the media. In negotiations on Capitol Hill for the National Defense Authorization Act, which we will call NDAA for brevity, there was a small provision attached to it called JCPA, or the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act. The NDAA is a must-pass bill. It funds our military. So Congress members know that anything attached to it would pass because we have to fund the military. In negotiations, you have the vaunted four corners of congressional leadership. That's Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy in the House, and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell in the Senate. Those are your top two Republicans and top two Democrats. It was 3-1 in terms of being in favor of the JCPA, with only Kevin McCarthy, the likely next Speaker of the House come January, that opposed this. Mitch McConnell had caved to Schumer and Pelosi in a softening of the McConnell spine as age and political osteoporosis set in. According to analysis by Breitbart News, the JCPA is essentially a transfer of wealth from Silicon Valley to the discredited and distrusted corporate legacy media, and is highly controversial. Beyond the financial payouts to media companies, they will be able to form a joint negotiating entity, a cartel, immune from antitrust law, to negotiate with big tech companies on the terms and conditions for carrying their content. Here's how they frame it. Even with the hastily added Senate amendment aimed at addressing conservative concerns regarding collusion between the media industry and big tech on the censorship of competitors, the bill still contains plenty of ways for the cartel to sideline conservative media. Provisions to ensure the cartel cannot discriminate on the basis of viewpoint are particularly unconvincing. The pretexts used by social media companies, fact checkers, and other arms of the corporate censorship apparatus are almost always viewpoint neutral. No one is censored for being a conservative, say the censors. They are censored for misinformation, hate speech, conspiracy theories, and other purportedly viewpoint neutral reasons. Now that's wordy and dense, so let's just break this down for you. The bill's lobbyists say that they have provisions to prevent one outlet from suppressing another. But when you look at the pretext for such censorship in the name of very broad interpretive things like misinformation, hate speech, and fact-checking, there's far too much room for subjectivity here. Remember that if a person or outlet called the coronavirus the China virus, or even Wuhan virus, that might be considered racist hate speech. If you said the virus was a Wuhan lab leak, that could be removed as disinformation. If you said the vaccine causes myocarditis, which it certainly has, that could be removed as vaccine misinformation. And the big one. If an outlet like the New York Post revealed that Hunter Biden was doing crack with hookers and giving 10% to the big guy in Ukrainian oil and gas deals, well, you guessed it. That got removed for being hacked and unsafe material. And as we know, both Twitter and Facebook censored and suppressed that very real information. But why did they do it? Well, we know that big tech considers the New York Post to be a far-right newspaper. So the JCPA would say, oh, no, we don't disfavor the New York Post because it's conservative per se, but we can favor the New York Times because the Post has unsafe news that may be misinformation. Do you see the devil in the details here? Here's Senator Mike Lee breaking down the bad attributes of the bill.
Now, what if a cartel wanted to exclude publishers that serve rural areas or those whose audience is predominantly lower income? There's a recent article that put it this way. These self-appointed mainstream and left-wing media cartels are allowed to exclude, based on the usual totally subjective factors they always do, such as trustworthiness, fake news, extremism, misinformation, hate speech, conspiracy, correction policy, expertise, authoritativeness, etc. To my fellow conservatives, do we think that forcing big tech and big media to get into a room together to collude and agree on the terms under which news can appear on tech platforms, do we think that's going to result in anything good for our voices? Do we think that's going to ameliorate or eliminate censorship? The JCPA is meant to help small local publishers. But importantly here, the text of the bill makes clear that it will actually crush them. So when you boil it all down, the JCPA is just a way to transfer wealth from a politically disfavored group to a politically favored one, under the guise of supposedly improving competition. But it doesn't actually improve competition. Instead, it imposes massive transaction costs in the form of lawyer fees, expert fees, and arbitration costs. Now, setting aside the failures in concept and in execution, the JCPA is arguably unconstitutional. The bill countenances no world in which a publisher can refuse to distribute the content of a publisher. In fact, doing so is forbidden by the anti-retaliation clause. This seems to me to be something likely to amount to a violation of the First Amendment, because it's compelled speech. There are few areas of First Amendment jurisprudence that are clearer than in the area of compelled speech. One of the things that we hold sacred in this country is that the government, in addition to telling you you can't say something, it's also very, very prohibited for the government to tell you you must say something. So how ironic that a bill meant to protect the only industry named in the First Amendment would do so by violating the right to free speech. Now, it also forces the platforms to pay for publishers' content, whether they want it or not. And so in that respect, it amounts to a sort of Obamacare for the press. But regardless of that, the policy problems, the constitutional problems, the conceptual problems in this bill can't be saved by the good intentions, intentions which I greatly admire and efforts which I appreciate, to hold big tech accountable. Many of the same arguments that I've raised have been outlined in an outstanding letter submitted to the committee by Professor Daniel Francis of NYU Law School, and I'm going to submit that to the record, Mr. Chairman. But I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill. While it's a laudable aim, that is protecting local journalism from the predation of big tech, its pursuit of that goal is irreparably flawed, and it risks causing immense harm both to journalism and to competition. It'd be better called the Journalism Cartel and Protectionism Act. This legislation, written in the shadows by trade groups and a small handful of special interests, is simply not ready for prime time. The committee should send it back to the drawing board for reconsideration through a more open and transparent process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Journalism Cartel and Protectionism Act. Certainly a more fitting title. We know that these very broad subjective areas have proven to prevent an informed electorate, which may have changed the results of the 2020 election, amounting to interference. So why was the JCPA in the bill in the first place? Well, it's likely that Democrats in the White House have been trying to sneak this in for quite a while. But it is a highly frowned upon practice to add something like this to a bill that Congress has to pass when it cannot be deliberated. But Democrats knew that. Let's be crystal clear. The JCPA has absolutely nothing to do with national defense. Former presidential candidate and Democrat Senator Amy Klobuchar was trying to push for this addition, however. She said, quote, "We literally are going to lose 1/3 of the nation's newspapers by the year 2025. It is about our own national future and national security." I fail to understand how this amounts to a national security issue. But let's talk about how the JCPA actually undermines national security. The JCPA creates a must-carry and must-pay scheme, forcing U.S. tech companies both to carry and pay for the content of news organizations through mandatory arbitration agreements. The organizations are not limited to American outlets, meaning that foreign media companies, especially those that promote propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party, would be propped up. While the JCPA carves out an exception for those owned or controlled by foreign powers, we have seen outlets like China Daily that partner with U.S. entities like Time and the LA Times to funnel their propaganda.